Have you ever crossed a line you swore you'd never cross? Have you ever wanted something so badly, even when you knew it could destroy you? Let me tell you a story about a woman who thought she had control, until she didn't. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I was never the kind of woman who let herself slip. Not in business, not in life. Everything I had, I earned. My career, my polished reputation, my ability to command a room with just a glance. Control was my currency, and I spent it wisely. That was until him. The first time I saw Nathan Caldwell, I thought nothing of him. Another high-powered executive with a sharp suit and a sharper tongue. Our company had just merged with his, and I knew men like him all too well. Arrogant, brilliant, accustomed to getting what they wanted. He extended his hand and I took it, professional and poised. But the moment our palms met, something shifted. His grip was firm, his thumb barely grazing my wrist, sending a quiet pulse of heat up my arm. "Looking forward to working with you," he said, his voice smooth like aged whiskey. I smiled, polite, detached, but I felt it, the first crack in my perfect control. The meeting went on, but I wasn't fully present. My body was betraying me, hyper-aware of his movements, the way he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the table. It was ridiculous, unacceptable. I had a rule: never mix business with pleasure. And I wasn't about to start now. I should have known better than to agree to dinner. It was just a business meeting. That's what I told myself as I stepped into the dimly lit restaurant, the air thick with the scent of aged bourbon and slow-roasted steak. A place where deals were made, alliances formed, nothing more. Nathan was already there, seated in the corner, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal strong forearms. His tie was loosened, his posture relaxed, a man who owned every space he occupied. "You're late," he said, smirking as he lifted his glass. I rolled my eyes, sliding into the seat across from him. "You sent the invitation last minute. And yet, here you are." I ignored the way my stomach tightened at his words, the way his gaze lingered just a second too long. I was here to talk strategy, mergers, logistics, not to entertain whatever this was. The waiter poured wine. Deep red. My favorite. I took a sip, feeling the heat bloom in my chest. Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me something," he said. "Are you always this composed? Or do you ever let yourself slip?" A challenge. A taunt wrapped in silk. I laughed, tilting my head. "I don't slip, Nathan. I don't have that luxury." He exhaled a quiet chuckle, swirling his drink. "That's a shame." The conversation stayed professional, mostly, but there was an undercurrent, an unspoken tension crackling between us like static electricity. I told myself it was nothing, until he reached across the table and traced his thumb over the stem of my wine glass. Casual, effortless. But the way my breath caught? Anything but. I pulled back, pretending not to notice. Booty saw it. The flicker in my eyes. The hesitation. And I knew then, he wasn't going to stop pushing. The first crack had formed, and I had no idea how deep it would go. I told myself it was nothing. A fleeting moment. A trick of the mind. By the time I arrived at the office the next morning, I had buried it. Smothered the memory of his touch under meetings, emails, and endless to-do lists. Business as usual, and then Nathan walked in. The air shifted the moment he stepped into the conference room. It wasn't just me. I could see it in the way others reacted to him. Subtle straightening of postures, eyes flicking toward him as if pulled by some invisible force. He had presence, and he knew it. "Morning," he murmured as he passed behind me, his voice a low vibration against my skin. I didn't turn. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The meeting began. but I felt him watching. Not openly, not obviously, but there. Always there. My body betrayed me, hyper-aware of every movement, every pause between his words. He was testing me, pushing the boundaries. Fine. Two could play that game. I leaned back in my chair, deliberately composed, tapping a pen against my lower lip as I spoke. His gaze dipped. Just for a second. Got you. Let's keep emotions out. Of it, I said, my tone crisp, dismissive. We need to be practical about this deal. A slow smile curved his lips. Practical, huh? He tilted his head, studying me. I wonder, do you ever let emotion take over, even for a second? I met his eyes, steady, unwavering. Not in business. Something flickered in his expression, amusement, intrigue. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice just low enough that only I could hear. Good thing this isn't just business. My breath hitched, just for a moment, barely perceptible. But he caught it. I forced a smirk. You like to think you're unpredictable, don't you? I like to think I recognize temptation when I see it. I should have ended it there. Shut it down. Walked away before the ground beneath me began to shift. Instead, I let myself enjoy it. The anticipation, the slow unraveling, the dangerous thrill of playing with fire. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted control anymore. I don't know when I stopped pretending. Maybe it was the second glass of wine. Maybe it was the way his fingertips brushed my wrist as he handed me a drink. Maybe it was the fact that I had spent the entire night telling myself this wasn't happening, only to realize I wanted it to. The corporate gala was the kind of event where everyone wore masks, even without them being required. Polished smiles, polite conversations, hidden agendas. I had mastered this game long ago. And yet, the moment I stepped onto the rooftop terrace for air, I felt exposed. Nathan was already there. A loosened tie, a whiskey glass in his hand, looking every bit as untouchable as he was tempting. Running away? He asked, a smirk tugging at his lips. Taking a break, I corrected, ignoring the way my pulse reacted to his voice. He stepped closer. Slowly. Deliberately. I think you like being chased, I scoffed, rolling my eyes. You think a lot of things about me. His gaze was heavy, searching. I know one thing for sure. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close he was. Too close. The city lights stretched behind him, the hum of voices from the party below fading into nothing. And what's that? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch lingered, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin just behind my jaw. You're dying to know how it feels, he murmured. I should have walked away. I should have laughed, thrown out some clever remark, reminded him and myself that this was dangerous. But then he tilted my chin up, his breath warm against my lips, and everything inside me shattered. And I let him kiss me. Slow at first. A test. A question. Then deeper. Darker. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me flush against him, and my fingers curled into his jacket, gripping it as if it was the only thing keeping me upright. It was intoxicating, terrifying, because the moment our lips met, I knew. There was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt, not because of regret, but because my skin still burned where he had touched me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that kiss. The way his hands had gripped my waist, the quiet growl that had rumbled in his chest when I had pressed closer. The way I had let myself go, sinking into him like I had been waiting for this moment all along. I had always prided myself on restraint, on knowing where the lines were and never crossing them. Now, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, something I could brush off, ignore, pretend never happened. Then I walked into the office and saw him. Nathan leaned casually against my desk, a knowing smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His suit was impeccable, his confidence unshaken, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. "Morning," he murmured, his voice like silk-wrapped steel. I kept my expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here." He cocked his head. "Shouldn't I?" I exhaled, steadying myself. "Last night was a mistake." Nathan chuckled, low and deep. "Funny thing about mistakes." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "We usually want to make them again." My breath hitched. His fingers grazed mine as he handed me a folder. An innocent gesture to anyone watching, but we both knew better. "Careful," I warned, my voice softer than I intended. Nathan's eyes darkened. "You say that like you don't love the fire." I should have told him to leave. I should have reminded him that we were colleagues, that this was reckless, dangerous. Instead, I let my fingers linger against his just a second too long, because the truth was, I did love the fire. And I had already stepped too far into the flames. I thought I could keep it contained. A stolen moment here, a lingering glance there. A silent game played in the shadows of boardrooms and late-night meetings. But fire doesn't stay small once it's been lit. It spreads. And with Nathan, it was already consuming me. The tension between us thickened with every encounter. I felt it in the way his gaze lingered when I spoke in meetings, in the way he brushed past me in hallways, deliberate, calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing. And worse, so did I. But I still told myself I had control. Until the night that proved I didn't. It started as another business dinner, a sleek, dimly lit restaurant downtown, tucked away from curious eyes. The excuse was simple, a client deal that required our attention. But the moment we sat down, I knew neither of us was thinking about contracts. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You seem tense." I lifted my glass, keeping my expression unreadable. "Long day." "Or maybe," he murmured, voice low. "You're trying too hard to pretend you don't want this." I swallowed, heat prickling at the base of my neck. "We agreed." "No," he interrupted. "You told yourself this wouldn't happen again. I never agreed to that." My pulse skittered. The control I had clung to so desperately was slipping through my fingers, unraveling thread by thread. Then he reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Such a simple touch, so slight, so fleeting. But it shattered something inside me. The breath I took was unsteady. He saw it. He felt it. And in that moment, I knew I had lost. By the time we left the restaurant, my body was already betraying me, moving toward him without hesitation. I barely remember the car ride, just flashes, his hand on my thigh, my fingers curled into his shirt, the sharp inhale when I leaned closer. The second we stepped into his hotel room, the last piece of restraint crumbled, and when his lips crashed into mine, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just losing control, this was surrendering to it. I woke up tangled in silk sheets and regret, not the kind that stops you, the kind that pulls you back in. Nathan lay beside me, his body half covered by the sheets, his breathing slow, steady, peaceful, as if he hadn't just unraveled every last thread of my self-control. I should have felt ashamed. I should have slipped out of bed, dressed quickly, walked away before this turned into something I couldn't escape. Instead, I watched him. His jawline, sharp even in sleep. The way his fingers still rested near my hip, like he wasn't ready to let go, even unconsciously. He wasn't supposed to feel safe, but for the first time in a long time, I did. And that terrified me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it, already knowing whose name would be on the screen. Michael, my husband. Guilt stabbed through me, sharp and unforgiving. What was I doing? Nathan stirred beside me, his eyes flickering open. And when he saw my phone in my hand, something dark flickered across his face. "You're thinking about him now?" His voice was rough, edged with something I couldn't quite name. I swallowed. I should go. Nathan didn't move, but his gaze burned into me. "That's what you said last time." He wasn't wrong. I had told myself this was it, that I would walk away, forget the way he made me feel. But we both knew the truth. I wasn't leaving. Not really, because I wasn't just playing with fire anymore. I was craving it. I told myself it was over. That morning, as I slipped out of Nathan's hotel room, the weight of my choices settled over me like a storm cloud. The scent of him still clung to my skin, a cruel reminder of how deep I had sunk. I went home. I kissed my husband. I smiled through breakfast, pretending I wasn't unraveling inside. But when Nathan texted me later that day, "You're thinking about me," I didn't delete the message. I didn't block his number. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering, knowing exactly what I should do. I just didn't want to do it. Days passed. We didn't talk, didn't touch. But the air between us crackled in every meeting, every passing glance. It was a game of restraint neither of us wanted to win. Then came the conference in Chicago, a 4-day trip. High-end hotels, late-night strategy meetings, and no escape. The moment I walked into the hotel bar that first night, I knew I had already lost. Nathan was there, leaning against the counter, whiskey in hand, watching me like he already knew how this night would end. I should have turned around. I should have walked away. Instead, I sat down beside him. His smirk was slow, knowing. "You lasted longer than I expected." I exhaled, shaking my head. "I can't keep doing this." Nathan tilted his head, studying me. "Then why are you here?" I didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. I was here because I wanted Toby. Because every time I tried to walk away, something inside me pulled me right back to him. Nathan leaned in, his voice low. "Tell me to stop." I should have. I wanted to. But instead, I whispered the one thing that sealed my fate. "Take me upstairs." And just like that, I crossed the point of no return. There's a moment after giving in when reality crashes back in. Cold, unforgiving, merciless. I felt it the second I woke up. Nathan's arm draped over my waist, his breath warm against my shoulder. The sheets were tangled, the air still thick with the scent of us. And yet, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had craved. I felt something else, something heavier. I slipped out of bed quietly, grabbing my phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up with missed calls. Michael. My stomach twisted. I knew what I was doing. I had known from the start. But seeing his name on the screen made it real in a way I had been desperately trying to ignore. "Running already?" Nathan. Voice was raw with sleep, but there was amusement in it too. Like he already knew I'd be back. I turned, clutching the phone in my hand. This can't keep happening. He propped himself up on one elbow, watching me. "You say that every time. This time I mean it." Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Then tell me you don't want me." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because even now, with guilt pressing down on me, I did want him. And that was the worst part. Nathan smirked. That's what I thought. I hated that he was right. Hated that no matter how much. I tried to convince myself otherwise. I wasn't done with this. Not even close. Because the truth was, I wasn't just paying the cost of desire. I was willing to. It's funny how things fall apart. Slowly at first, like cracks in glass you don't see until they shatter. I thought I could keep everything compartmentalized. Nathan and I, the stolen moments, the secret. The facade I built around my life, my marriage, my career, the perfect little bubble I had once convinced myself was enough. But bubbles don't last. And eventually, it all comes to a head. It started with a phone call. Michael had been distant for weeks. I'd noticed it, but had pushed it aside, too busy with the whirlwind that Nathan had become in my life. But this time, it was different. I could hear the tension in his voice, sharp and brittle. "We need to talk." The words echoed through me like an alarm bell. I told him I'd be home soon, my hands trembling as I hung up. And as I walked into our apartment, I knew this wasn't going to be the conversation I wanted it to be. Michael was standing in the living room when I walked in. His face was tight, his eyes hard. He wasn't angry, not yet, but I could see the storm building. "Where were you last night?" he asked, his voice cold. I froze, my heart pounding. In my chest. I thought I could lie. I thought I could smooth over the truth with words, with anything to distract him from what was really happening. But I couldn't. Not anymore. "I was at the conference," I said, my voice thin. Michael took a step forward. "You were with him, weren't you?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My breath caught in my throat, my chest tightening. I couldn't deny it. "Michael, He cut me off, shaking his head. "How long, Emma? How long has this been going on?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How long? How long had I been lying to myself, telling myself I could manage it, that it didn't matter? How long had I been betraying him and myself? I opened my mouth to answer, but the words didn't come. I didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense. And then I saw it. The look in his eyes. The one I'd been avoiding. It was the look of a man who had lost something that had never been his to begin with. But he had trusted it was. "Get out," Michael said, his voice breaking through the silence. "I need you to leave." I wanted to argue, to beg for a chance. But I knew it was too late. I had already crossed the line. And now everything was falling apart. I packed my things in a daze. The words Michael had said still echoed in my mind, over and over again, like a record skipping, on repeat. Get out. That was all I could hear. The man I had married, the man who had trusted me, had loved me. He was gone. And I had no one to blame but myself. I should have fought for him. I should have chosen him over everything else. The chaos, the fire that had burned so brightly between Nathan and me. But I didn't. And now I was left with nothing. Nothing. But the hollow ache of loss and the emptiness of my own choices. I finished packing in silence, my hands shaking as I folded clothes, my thoughts a tangled mess. The reality of what I had done, the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies, was sinking in. And there was no escaping it now. When I was done, I stood in the middle of the apartment. The place that had once felt like home now felt like a cage. I glanced around one last time, my heart heavy with regret, but then my phone buzzed. Nathan's name flashed across the screen, his message short and to the point. "Where are you?" I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to feel that pull toward him, the desire that was still there, clawing at me. But I couldn't help. "Myself," I texted back. "I'm leaving." A few moments later, my phone buzzed again. "Leaving? What happened?" The question hung in the air, unspoken. What had happened? How had we gone from stolen moments in hotel rooms to this? To me, standing alone in my apartment, destroyed by my own choices? I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to explain everything, the guilt, the heartbreak, the wreckage of my marriage. But I couldn't. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know if I wanted to fix it. My heart was torn in two, caught between the man I had betrayed and the one who had set my soul on fire. And so, I did what I always did when faced with too much emotion. I ran. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not here. Not with the wreckage of my past staring me in the face. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, but as I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. Again. This time it was Michael. "I've already packed your things. You're not coming back. Don't contact me again." And just like that, the door was closed. No going back. No second chances. I stood there in the hallway, the sound of the elevator door closing behind. My heart pounding in my chest, the weight of Michael's words still pressed down on me, suffocating me. He had packed my things. He had drawn a line, and I had crossed it. There was no undoing what had been done, no way to erase the trail of destruction I'd left behind. The world outside felt cold, like a void waiting to swallow me whole. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. This time, it was Nathan. "Where are you?" I stared at the message, the screen flickering under the dim light of the hallway. Part of me wanted to run to him, to fall into his arms and let him take away the pain, the guilt, the emptiness that was starting to fill me up. But another part of me, an unrecognizable part, knew better. I had been living in a haze, swept up in the intensity of the forbidden, thinking I could control the chaos. But now the chaos was consuming me. I couldn't go back. Not to Nathan. Not to that. I needed to decide who I was going to be. I needed to decide what I was willing to lose and what I was willing to fight for. I stepped into the cold night air, the cool wind biting my skin. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even care. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep running from myself. I had to face the consequences of what I had done and make a choice. I sat down on a bench nearby, my phone still clutched, in my hand. The messages from Nathan kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. But I didn't open them, because I already knew what I had to do. The next message that came through was from Michael. "Don't come back. This is over." And that was it. There was no turning back now. I had broken something too fragile to fix. But as I stood up, ready to walk away from the wreckage of my past, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Nathan. "I'm here. Where are you?" I felt the pull toward him, the same pull that had led me astray time and time again. But this time, it wasn't enough. I put my phone in my pocket and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, I was walking toward something, toward myself. The city lights blurred around me as I walked aimlessly, my feet moving without direction, carrying me further from everything I knew. The cold night air bit at my skin, but I welcomed it, the sharpness of it, the clarity it brought. The world around me felt like a distant echo, my mind trapped in a whirlwind of guilt and desire. I could still feel Nathan's presence, his pull, like a magnetic force that had once been so intoxicating. But now, the sensation was dull, as if the very thing that had felt so thrilling was now just a shadow of itself. I couldn't go back to that. I couldn't keep living in the constant tug-of-war between my past and the chaos I had created. Stopped at a small cafe, the warm glow of the lights spilling onto the sidewalk. I hadn't eaten in hours, and my stomach twisted in hunger and something else. A feeling I couldn't name. I walked inside, ordered a coffee, and found a seat by the window. As I sipped the drink, I allowed myself to breathe. To really breathe. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was outside the storm. I pulled out my phone, hesitating for a moment before I unlocked it. Nathan's messages had stopped, replaced with silence. But Michael's were still there, buried beneath the hundreds of unread texts from Nathan. "I'm sorry. Please, talk to me. I never thought you'd do this. Not to me." The words stung, even now. I felt them deep in my chest, their weight unbearable. but they were just words. I had spoken my own lies, my own truths. I didn't know what to do with them, but I couldn't ignore the fact that Michael was gone. I couldn't undo the destruction. And Nathan. He was still out there, somewhere, waiting for me to pick up the pieces and come to him. But I wasn't sure I wanted to. Not anymore. The truth was, I was afraid of what I had become, what I had allowed myself to. I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering my thoughts. This was a moment of reckoning. The choices I had made had changed everything. But it didn't have to be the end. It didn't have to define me. When I opened my eyes, I made a decision. Decision to step away from the spiral I had been caught in. I had to rebuild, for myself. I didn't need Nathan. I didn't need Michael, not like I had thought. What I needed was to find myself again, to remember who I was before Thalise, before the manipulation, before the chaos. It would be hard. There was no easy way to make amends. But this time, I was choosing myself. And that was the only thing I could control. The days after that night passed in a blur. Each one felt like a test, a series of small victories and quiet defeats. I woke up each morning with a weight pressing down on my chest, but I kept moving forward, one step at a time. I found myself slipping into routines again, making coffee in the morning, organizing my apartment, going for long walks in the city, trying to piece together a version of myself that wasn't defined by my mistakes. It wasn't easy. The temptation to fall back into old patterns, to reach out to Nathan or Michael, was always there, lurking at the edges of my thoughts. But I resisted. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel the rawness of everything, the pain, the emptiness, the guilt, and I let it wash over me without trying to escape. I didn't hide from it. I accepted it. I had to. One afternoon, as I was walking through the park, I bumped into someone unexpectedly. "Rebecca?" I turned to see my old colleague, Sarah, standing there, her smile warm but uncertain. I hadn't seen her in months, not since I had left the office. She was one of the few people who had remained professional, who hadn't judged me. But now, I could tell there was something different in her eyes. "Hey, Sarah," I said, trying to force a smile, but the edges of my lips felt stiff. "I didn't expect to see you here. How are you doing?" she asked, her voice soft, as if she already knew the answer. I hesitated for a moment. I'm getting there. Slowly." She gave me a knowing look. "I heard about what happened. I just wanted to check in. You okay?" Her kindness caught me off guard. The weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift for a moment, like a brief glimpse of daylight in an otherwise stormy sky. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm trying to figure it out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Trying to make things right." She studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You don't have to fix everything right away. You just have to take it one step at a time. You're stronger than you think." Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time in a while, I allowed myself to believe them. Maybe I could start over. Maybe this was my chance to rebuild. But there was still so much to process. The scars I carried from my past would never truly disappear, no matter how hard I tried to outrun them. They would always be a part of me. And yet somehow, I didn't feel like the woman I had been. The woman who had lied and manipulated, who had betrayed the man she loved. I felt different, changed. It was a slow transformation, like the turning of the seasons, but I could see it now. I could feel it. "I should go," Sarah said, glancing at her watch. "But take care of yourself, okay?" I nodded, managing a small smile. "I will. Thanks for checking in." As she walked away, I stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the park. The trees were just beginning to show their autumn colors, a reminder that change could be beautiful, even when it was hard. I had a long road ahead of me, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment where desire clashed with consequence? Let's talk about it below. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping infidelity and cheating wife stories. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know when a new story drops. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.